The biggest challenge facing science is both how do we do the best we can? How do we harness our creativity, our insight, our passion, and make discoveries that are going to transform society, make life better for people, but also satisfy our curiosity about how the world works. But doing that is going to require scientists doing things differently from the way they have before. Not just staying in our ivory towers, pushing the boundaries of knowledge, which has served us so well in the past, but things are happening too fast these days. And I believe that scientists need not only to be making those discoveries, but sharing them more broadly with policymakers, with citizens, with business leaders. And to do that communication directly, not just through intermediaries. And so I think that scientists need to learn to become bilingual. We need to teach our students to speak the language of science, which is really important, but also the language of lay people, because communication and sharing is going to be critically important. But I think the challenges are going to require even more than good communication, which should be two-way. But in that listening that scientists need to be doing, there will be many more opportunities for scientists to not just do their own thing and then share it, but listen to what society is struggling with, listen to what the big social challenges are, and respond to that in a way that engages communities, engages business, engages policymakers, and in many times with citizens co-creating knowledge so that people have more trust in that science. I was astounded when Research America did a polling a number of years ago and found that most Americans cannot name a living scientist. That epitomizes some of the challenges we have in this post-truth, fake news, alternative facts world. Scientists need to be out there and be seen as science, but not seen as imperious and entitlement mentality, but seen as being helpful and useful. We in the scientific community know how important what we do is, but that needs to be broadly appreciated by people who not only can fund it, but can use it. And so I think that we're seeing a new awareness in the scientific community about the need for scientists to not just communicate, but engage more broadly with the world, and in so doing, serve society better.
The challenge of science is the correct level of funding, and that has many aspects. One of them, I think, is important, is to keep pockets of research, independent research, alive, not only doing very big science, but also doing science at a smaller scale with innovation, with possibilities of exploring, and keeping the fundamental science fully alive. I think many people forget that many of the things that they enjoy today are based on physics that were elaborated about a century ago, and that were only understood by a handful of people in some sort of forlorn universities. And I think that is something that nobody should forget.
So when I think about the biggest challenges facing science in the next decade, I guess I think about a couple of things that go hand in hand. Funding is always a challenge, and that's going to be true no matter what politics, no matter what country, no matter what time. As we push the boundaries further and further in all fields of science, it's an expensive endeavor. And so we have to prepare for that. We have to sort of think ahead. How are we going to be the leaders, and how are we going to plan for that? But the other side of the coin is the enthusiasm comes from the general public. And education is so incredibly important. And people talk about STEM, and they talk about education in elementary schools. I think there needs to just be a broader attempt to get people involved in science and to understand that they're part of it. They're part of everything that's going on. They're part of everything that we observe. They're part of the planet. They're part of medicine. And one of the things I really like about dog genetics is the way we do it is a partnership with the general population. All of our samples come from dog owners and breeders and people who go to agility shows and conformation shows and frisbee contests and everything else you can think of. So the first thing we always tell people is you're entering into a partnership with us. And we find that when we do that, they're really excited. They want to stay involved. They want to stay informed. They want to learn more. And I think we need to give the general public more opportunities like that.
The biggest challenge facing science is one of, and in the next decade is probably one that's been with it for a while, which is social responsibility, which is making sure that your applications have considered unintended consequences, including accidental and intentional abuse. And prioritization of uses of resources. I mean, when you're bringing down the costs, one of the prioritization, which is economic, becomes less critical. But there are other prioritizations in terms of how things are brought out, public relations, communication, making sure people understand making sure the public is engaged in a multi-way discussion. I think these are the big challenges.
There are so many challenges facing science today. There's obviously the subject matter. Doing visionary science is a bit like driving in a fog. Okay, you're trying to stick to the road, but you don't really know where the road is, and it's never been navigated before, and the fog clears. It clears a little bit over here, and you say, oh, I'm getting an idea. But then it also clears a little bit over there. And then the question then is, how do you ever know which way to go? So it's based on intuition. And the reason I bring that up is that really great science is driven by a combination of insight, experience, and guesswork. It can't be programmed. As much as we'd like it to be programmed, it can't be programmed. So the single biggest challenge that I think we have now in science is it's difficult enough to negotiate your way in a fog, but it's very, very difficult to do it when the folks that pay for the research require you to write out increasingly an accurate prescription of what you're going to do as you drive through the fog. Okay, and so as organizations like the NIH become more inflexible about the directions that you can take, meaning, of course, you can initiate your research, but it's harder to change the direction. And I know that the NIH has some mechanisms to try to specifically promote that, but nonetheless, overall, in the last 10 years, we've gone in a direction that's more conservative. And so I would say the single biggest challenge for science today is certainly the level of funding that we have, which is not adequate for foundational science, but also the style of the funding I think should be evaluated carefully in terms of whether it encourages the most creative work. It's not just the amount of money. We actually do have a lot of money for research in this country as compared to almost any other country. But it's as much of an issue of are we allocating it in the best way to make science more effective.
Funding is a big issue for us. Science costs money, and particularly when funding is limited, we tend to do more conservative science. So really significant funding that allows us to do risky science, to push boundaries. I think that's a big challenge. Science funding rates are generally flat. We hope they'll at least stay that way, but what it does, the current funding environment in science keeps us really conservative, and it's very hard to do the things we know have a big shot of paying off and helping us make a major advance, and this is in all fields. but that we know will be a risk and will cost a lot of money, and we may not necessarily get that answer that we expect. So more funding is really, really a big important one for science as a whole.
So I think one of the biggest challenges of scientists and of science is really informing people about the value of science. I think we've lost that as a society, that science is valuable and it enables so many things. I think the new generation may not see that as they did, say, 30 or 40 years ago. So I think as scientists, we have to be more vocal of how we express what we are doing in ways that better reflect the impact that we have on society.
Biggest challenge facing science in general, something that concerns me is the issue of attracting and retaining young, brilliant minds in the field. As science is somewhat under attack, budgets get slashed, it becomes less of an attractive profession, and therefore we really need great young people. And you see a lot of people come in and they get disillusioned after a while because there simply aren't enough faculty positions at universities or research staff positions at places like Carnegie Labs for all of them. But there's a whole wide range of opportunity, and it's something we need to get better at, is educating young people as to what all those opportunities are to be a scientist these days.
Well, I mean, we have a real challenge in the way the science is perceived by the society. I think, to me, that's probably something I never expected would happen. And that right now says that we have got to concentrate on a couple of things. One thing is that making it so that the science that we do is understandable by people who are not trained in the science. That's absolutely critical. Otherwise, they have absolutely no reason to believe in it. They have no reason to want to be interested in it. We've got to learn how to make people understand. And we also got to teach people how to deal with a world that isn't absolutely solidly secure in the sense that you know everything. In other words, when we don't teach probability theory in grade schools, we don't teach it in high schools even. And let people draw conclusions which are a little fuzzy. How do you draw a conclusion from a fuzzy thing? And that instead of just waiting for an expert to tell you, you want to have some sort of reasonable way of going at it yourself. And if we can't get people to think in such a way, we've failed, and we failed the society in the deepest sense. And that is something I would have not have said 5 years ago.